This project aims to outline the professional figure of the interpreter seen from a social and ethical perspective. It is a profession with centuries of history. In fact, some of the oldest references to the use of interpreters have been discovered in inscriptions on the tombs of the Elephantine princes of the 6th dynasty of the Egyptian Whole Kingdom, dated around the 3rd millennium before Christ. Also, during the Roman Empire, the state began to hire interpreters for public administration, to coordinate multi-ethnic legions, to station along the borders, or for negotiations. Then, during the age of discoveries and explorations, interest in languages grew, and consequently the activity of interpreting also experienced a great increase that continued throughout the following centuries. Clearly, they were not professional interpreters, but it is easy to assume that people with language learning skills have always existed. But then, who is the interpreter? Often, when we talk about interpreting, we tend to confuse it with the mere knowledge of several languages, but the subject goes far behind that. In fact, the interpreter can be understood as one who manages to break down cultural and language barriers, allowing people from different backgrounds to communicate freely. Thus, if communication is the greatest wealth of human beings, the interpreter has the privilege of helping those who would like to communicate but fail in the attempt because of their linguistic differences. When interpreters explain their work, interlocutors generally react in two ways. Either they are amazed at the interpreter's skills, or they think it is a totally depressing job, as they naively believe it is a simple repetition of other people's speeches. It is therefore wrong to think of the interpreter as one who mechanically repeats what is said by others. In some ways, in fact, this work can be described as creative, since they rework, reformulating the information heard, and they do so continuously to help people understand each other. Despite this, they are considered a secondary figure, not so much in terms of importance as visibility. The interpreter is never the recipient of the message. Their role is solely that of a channel through which the message transits. For this reason, their speaking power is limited and subordinate to that of the actors, who establish the object, the rhythm, and the duration of the communication, and the alternation of turns. Since they are obliged by the ontological codes to maintain attitudes of neutrality and invisibility, they must limit themselves to transferring the message from the source language to the target language as clearly and completely as possible, undertaking to respect the speaker's vouloir dire without interfering in any way. They must also avoid letting their emotions show. The situation is different for the cultural mediator, a figure who is very often confused with that of the interpreter and whose task is to put the foreign person in communication with the staff of various social sectors, as they are required to act as a bridge between the person and the institutions. The mediator is often a foreign but socially integrated person or a volunteer trained through professional courses and is thus understood as a facilitator who, in addition to convey a message from one language to another, also plays a supportive role for the person they interpret, who is very often in difficult situations. This leads the mediator to interfere in the discourse, making adjustments and simplifications. Their skills do not only concern linguistic aspects, but also involve multiple areas such as psychology, sociology, listening skills, empathy, and much more. All this is not possible for an interpreter, as it would mean betraying the code of ethics, thereby incurring disciplinary measures. Very often, these professions are seen as ephemeral, but to disprove this, we will discuss two important areas in which they are fundamental to the protection of people's rights: the legal field and the health field. If, for example, we dwell on a particular type of interpreting, namely the legal one, it is not difficult to understand how the professional figure of the interpreter is of great importance to ensure that a fundamental right of all human beings, that of defense, is respected. Seleskovich describes this with the image of two people trying to communicate with each other, but they are separated by a glass wall that does not allow any sound to pass through. These two people can see but not hear each other. Therefore, the only means by which they can break through this wall is the interpreter, the remover of cultural and linguistic barriers. However, interpreter must comply with what their job is, which is to convey a message clearly and without interfering. It is the task of the cultural mediator to welcome and support the person speaking a different language. The same applies to another important area where the protection of the human rights of people from different backgrounds is needed: the medical field. The new social order sees an increasing presence of immigrants, which has led to a new typology of patients. The figure of the interpreter comes into play when the patient finds it difficult to externalize their discomfort. In such a delicate context, it is easy for feelings of fear and frustration to arise. It is at that moment that the cultural mediator is indispensable to create a sort of therapeutic alliance. These two examples should demonstrate how wrong it is to consider these language professions superfluous, since, thanks to their communication and interest in others, they are able to protect the rights of the weakest, who find themselves in contexts other than their own. Interpreting, therefore, means creating a bridge between different parties in order to bring them closer. An ancient Chinese proverb states, "Unfortunately, there are more men who build walls than those who build bridges." We can now say that the interpreter is one of the latter. The interpreter is a bridge between cultures.